The grand ballroom of the Blackwood Citadel was a galaxy of shimmering gowns and polished armor, but for Serenith, it was a cage of silent judgment. She stood near a marble column, trying to make herself as small as the Omega designation that had defined her entire life. Here, amidst the vibrant, powerful alphas and betas of the kingdom, she was a pale, washed-out thing, a wolfless wolf, a defect. Her sister, Isolara, was a constellation of her own. With her fiery hair and the confident grace of a true alpha female, she was currently laughing in the arms of a handsome young lord, her wolf spirit a palpable, crackling energy in the air. Serenith felt a familiar, dull ache in her chest. It wasn't jealousy, not exactly. It was the hollow echo of what she was supposed to be, a constant reminder of her own failure. Still propping up the architecture, little sister? Isolara's voice, though not unkind, cut through Serenith's thoughts. She had detached herself from her dance partner to drift over, her perfect posture a stark contrast to Serenith's hunched shoulders. Someone has to, Serenith murmured, attempting a smile that felt more like a grimace. Father is watching, Isolara said, her gaze flicking toward the balcony where their parents stood, their expressions tight with disappointment. He had hoped someone might ask you to dance. The words were meant to be encouraging, but they landed like stones. Hope was a luxury Serenith had given up long ago. No one danced with the shy Omega from the disgraced Silver Mist pack, the one whose wolf had never fully emerged. At 21, her inner beast was a mere flicker, a whisper of instinct without form or voice. In a society that prized strength and the power of the shift, she was fundamentally broken. I'm fine, Isolara. Go, enjoy yourself. Isolara hesitated, her brow furrowed with a flicker of genuine concern. Serenith, you have a good heart. Your empathy, it's a gift. A useless gift. That was the unspoken part, her ability to feel the emotions of others, a strange, heightened sensitivity that came with her Omega status, was seen as a weakness. It made her fragile, prone to being overwhelmed. It was not a power you could win a battle or secure a bloodline with. It was the power to cry when others were sad. As Isolara was swept back into the swirling vortex of the dance floor, a sudden hush fell over the hall. It was not a gentle quiet, but a heavy, suffocating silence, thick with apprehension. The music faltered and died. The laughter ceased. Every head turned toward the grand entrance. He had arrived. King Calethorn, the alpha of alphas, the Shadow King. Reputation preceded him like a storm front. They said he was more beast than man, that the royal bloodline was tainted by a curse that made his wolf a monstrous, uncontrollable thing. They said he ruled the northern packs with an iron fist because his heart was made of it. He was a recluse, rarely seen outside his mountain fortress, and his presence at the annual Unity Ball was both a rare honor and a terrifying omen. Serenith instinctively pressed herself further against the cold marble of the column, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't need her empathic sense to feel the wave of pure, primal fear that washed over the room. It was an emotion so potent, it was almost a physical force. King Calethorn stood framed in the massive doorway, a figure carved from darkness and power. He was taller than any wolf shifter Serenith had ever seen, broad-shouldered and clad in black armor that seemed to drink the light from the chandeliers. His hair was as black as a moonless night, and his face was a mask of cold, severe beauty. But it was his eyes that held the entire court captive. They were the color of a winter storm, swirling with a chilling intensity that promised nothing but ruin. He did not move for a long moment, his gaze sweeping across the frozen assembly. It was a predator's gaze, assessing, dismissing. Lords and ladies who commanded entire territories shrank under his scrutiny. Alpha warriors, bristling with their own power, lowered their eyes in deference. He was the apex, and everyone here knew it. Serenith watched, mesmerized by the sheer terrifying scale of his power. It was a tangible aura, a crushing weight that made the air thin and hard to breathe. Then, his gaze landed on her. It was not a passing glance. His eyes, which had swept over hundreds of glittering, important people with utter indifference, stopped. They locked onto hers from across the vast hall. For a heartbeat, the world fell away. The fear, the whispers, the music, it all vanished. There was only the unnerving focus of his stare. A strange sensation prickled at her skin. The crushing pressure of his presence didn't feel like a threat to her. Instead, something deep inside her, the fragile, dormant flicker of her own spirit, seemed to uncurl. It was a bizarre feeling, like a frozen spring beginning to thaw. King Calethorn began to move. He did not walk toward the throne set for him on the dais. He did not greet the High Council or the host of the ball. He walked in a straight, unwavering line, directly toward her column. The crowd did not gasp. They were too afraid. Instead, they parted before him like water before the prow of a warship. A silent, gaping path cleared between the most powerful man in the kingdom and the most insignificant girl in the room. Serenith's breath hitched. This couldn't be happening. He must be heading for someone behind her, someone important. She risked a glance over her shoulder, but there was only a tapestry of a long-dead king. He stopped directly in front of her. The sheer proximity of him was overwhelming. He smelled of pine and cold stone and something else, something wild and dangerous that spoke to the deepest, most primal part of her. Up close, she could see the faint lines of strain around his eyes, the rigid set of his jaw. There was a deep, ancient pain simmering beneath the icy control, a suffering so profound it made her own heart ache in sympathy. Her empathic sense, usually a burden, was screaming at her now, showing her flashes of shadow and rage and a loneliness so vast it was like an abyss. "You," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like stones grinding together deep within the earth. It was not a question. Serenith could not find her own voice. She could only stare up at him, her mind a complete blank. He lifted a hand and she flinched, expecting a blow or a dismissal. Instead, his gloved fingers brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was shockingly gentle, a spark of warmth against her cold skin. "What is your name?" he commanded, his storm-gray eyes boring into hers. "Serenith," she whispered, the sound barely audible. A flicker of something unreadable passed through his expression. It wasn't kindness, but it wasn't cruelty either. It was recognition, as if he had been searching for something for a very long time and had just, impossibly, found it. "Serenith," he repeated, the name a solemn vow on his lips. He then extended his hand. "You will dance with me." The entire court held its breath. The silence was absolute, broken only by the frantic thumping of Serenith's own heart. The king's gloved hand remained outstretched, an undeniable command. To refuse was unthinkable. Her own hand, trembling, rose to meet his. Her small, bare fingers disappeared into his large, leather-clad palm. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot up her arm. It was the mate pull, the fabled, undeniable call of a destined bond. But this was wrong. It couldn't be. He was the Alpha King, and she was nothing. A broken omega. The fates did not write such cruel jokes. He led her toward the center of the floor, his grip firm and inescapable. The sea of shifters parted for them, their faces a mixture of shock, disbelief, and for some, unveiled hostility. She could feel the sharp sting of her mother's mortification and her father's bewildered fury from across the room. She saw Isolara, her mouth slightly agape, her perfect composure finally cracked. When they reached the center of the vast empty dance floor, the king nodded curtly to the terrified musicians. A slow, hesitant waltz began to play. He pulled her into a formal hold, one hand on the small of her back, the other still enveloping hers. His touch was a brand, searing through the thin fabric of her dress. "You are afraid," he stated, his voice low and for her ears only. "You are the king," she managed to reply, her eyes fixed on the polished black metal of his breastplate. She couldn't bring herself to meet his gaze. "Look at me." It was not a request. Slowly, hesitantly, she lifted her head. The intensity in his storm-gray eyes was even more potent up close. She saw the pain again, a darkness swirling just behind the surface. And then, for a split second, she saw something else, a flicker of raw, desperate need. "Why are you not cowering like the others?" he asked, his voice rough. "I can feel their fear. It is a nauseating stench. But you feel different." Serenith swallowed hard. I don't know, Your Majesty." It was a lie. She did know. Her strange empathy was not just receiving his pain, it was instinctively reaching out, trying to soothe it. The frightened flicker of her own wolf, so long dormant, was drawn to the raging inferno of his. It wasn't a conscious choice. It was an instinct she couldn't control. As they moved to the somber music, a strange peace began to settle between them. Serenith could feel the rigid tension in his shoulders begin to ease, the frantic, predatory energy that surrounded him calming into something less volatile. It was as if her very presence was a balm to a wound he had carried for a lifetime. Suddenly, he stiffened. A low growl rumbled in his chest, and his hand on her back tightened almost painfully. His eyes squeezed shut for a moment, and a tremor ran through his powerful frame. Serenith felt a spike of agony from him, sharp, blinding, like a knife to the temple. It was a glimpse of his hidden vulnerability, a crack in the granite facade. "Your Majesty?" she whispered, a genuine thread of concern in her voice. His eyes snapped open, the storm within them raging once more. The moment of weakness was gone, locked away behind a wall of ice. But he didn't release her. He held her closer, his head dipping slightly as if to draw strength from her scent. The dance ended. The final note of music hung in the air, heavy and expectant. King Calethorn did not release her. He stood in the center of the floor, holding the wolfless Omega in his arms, as if she were the only anchor in his world. Then he looked past her, his gaze sweeping over the stunned court, and his voice rang out cold and absolute, a king's decree that would shatter her world forever. "She is mine." The proclamation echoed in the cavernous hall, each word a hammer blow against the fragile silence. "She is mine." It was a statement of ownership, a claim as old as their people, raw and possessive. Serenith felt the blood drain from her face. This was not a dream. This was a nightmare unfolding in silk and candlelight. King Calethorn released her, but only to take her hand again, his grip possessive. He began to lead her from the dance floor, not back to her column, but toward the royal dais and the exit beyond. He moved with a purpose that defied any challenge. "Your Majesty, you cannot." A voice, sharp and furious, cut through the stunned quiet. Lord Velmeyer, the king's uncle and head of the royal council, stepped forward. He was a tall, severe man with eyes as cold as his nephew's, but his held a cruel, calculating glint where the king's held pain. The girl is an Omega, a faulty one, at that, from a disgraced line. She is not fit. Calethorn stopped. He did not turn his whole body, only his head, fixing his uncle with a look of such lethal intent that Velmeyer actually took a half step back. The temperature in the hall seemed to drop by 20 degrees. "Are you questioning my claim, uncle?" Calethorn's voice was deceptively soft, yet it carried more menace than a shout. "I am questioning your sanity!" Velmeyer shot back, his own alpha pride warring with his survival instinct. "The kingdom needs a strong queen, a powerful Luna to secure the royal line, not this." He gestured dismissively towards Serenith, his contempt a physical slap. Serenith flinched, shame burning hot in her cheeks. Everything he said was true. She was unfit. She was a disgrace. Why was the king doing this? Calethorn's jaw tightened. The kingdom needs a king who is not tormented by the ghosts of his ancestors. This Omega, she quiets them. The admission was stark, stripped of all pride. He turned his gaze back to Serenith, and for a fleeting moment, the entire court saw the raw vulnerability he had shown her on the dance floor. Her presence is the only peace I have known in a decade. I will not relinquish it. She will be housed in the royal wing. See to it. The last words were a command thrown to a nearby guard, who bowed low, his face pale. Without another glance at his fuming uncle or the scandalized court, Calethorn pulled Serenith along, sweeping her out of the ballroom and into the cold stone corridors of the Citadel's private wing. The heavy oak doors closed behind them, shutting out the world. They were alone. The hallway was lit by sparse torches, casting long, dancing shadows. The king's power was no longer a crushing weight, but a suffocating blanket in the enclosed space. He led her through a maze of corridors until they reached a set of imposing carved doors guarded by two of his personal sentinels, the elite shadow guard. They bowed as he approached, their faces impassive masks. He pushed the doors open, revealing a suite of rooms that was larger than her entire family home. It was opulent but stark, dominated by dark wood, heavy tapestries, and a massive, unlit hearth. It felt less like a home, and more like a beautiful prison. "These will be your chambers," he said, his voice returning to its usual cold, detached tone. He released her hand, and the loss of contact was so abrupt she felt suddenly, terrifyingly cold. "You will not leave without my permission. You will be attended to. You will want for nothing, except your freedom." Serenith finally found her voice, though it trembled. "Why? Why are you doing this, Your Majesty?" He turned to face her, his tall frame silhouetted against the dim light from the hallway. "Because when you are near, the beast inside me sleeps, and I will pay any price for that silence." He didn't wait for a reply. He simply turned and walked out, the heavy doors closing behind him with a final booming click that sounded like the lid of a coffin. Serenith was left standing alone in the vast, silent room, a prisoner of the Shadow King. The first few days of Serenith's confinement were a blur of fear and confusion. Servants, their eyes downcast and faces carefully blank, brought her meals, gowns, and anything she requested, all without speaking a word unless spoken to. They were terrified of her, or rather, of the king's sudden and inexplicable interest in her. She was not a guest. She was a curiosity, a fragile thing the beast had brought back to its lair. Her rooms were luxurious, with a canopied bed large enough for 6 and a balcony that overlooked the jagged peaks of the northern mountains. But the beauty was a mockery. The door was always guarded. She was a bird in a very gilded cage, The king himself was a phantom. She did not see him, but she felt his presence. Sometimes, late at night, she would feel a wave of his torment from a distance, a spike of rage, a deep throb of pain, and she would lie awake, her own heart aching for him until the feeling subsided. Her empathic sense, once a source of misery, had become a strange, invisible tether to her captor. On the fourth day, a new face appeared. A man in the uniform of the king's beta entered her chambers. He was older than the king, with streaks of gray in his dark hair and kind, weary eyes. "My name is Fenrith," he said, offering a small, respectful bow. "I am the king's beta. His Majesty has asked me to ensure you are comfortable." "I am a prisoner, Lord Fenrith," Serenith stated, her voice quiet but firm. She had decided that cowering would do her no good. Fenrith sighed, the sound heavy with resignation. "That you are, my lady. And for that, I am sorry. Caelthorn, the king, he is not a cruel man by nature. He is a desperate one." "Desperate enough to steal a woman from her life and lock her away?" "Yes," Fenrith said simply. "He is that desperate." He looked at her, his gaze searching. "He says you quiet the curse. I did not believe him, but standing here now, the air around you is calm, peaceful. For years, the king's presence has been like a gathering storm. With you, the storm has passed." Serenith wrapped her arms around herself. "What is this curse? Everyone whispers about it, but no one truly knows." Fenrith hesitated, his loyalty to his king warring with the compassion in his eyes. "It is an affliction of the royal blood, an ancestral darkness. With each generation, the king's inner wolf grows more powerful, more uncontrollable. For Caelthorn, it is extreme. It is a second form, a creature of pure shadow and rage that fights for control. It causes him constant, agonizing pain. The only thing that has ever eased it, even for a moment, is you." The confession hung in the air between them. The Shadow King was not just a moniker, it was a literal description of his suffering. He wasn't a monster. He was a man battling one within himself. "He has not come to see me," Serenith said, the words a soft admission of a strange disappointment. "He is afraid to," Fenrith replied. "He is afraid of what his beast might do, even with you near. And he is afraid of what it means to need someone this much. Power is all he has ever known, and you, my lady, have a power over him that he cannot comprehend." That night, Serenith could not sleep. Fenrith's words echoed in her mind. She stood on the balcony, the cold mountain air biting at her cheeks. In the distance, she saw a lone light in the highest tower of the citadel, the king's private study. She could feel him there, a beacon of lonely anguish. Without thinking, she closed her eyes and focused. She let her empathic gift, her supposed weakness, flow out of her. She didn't try to fight his pain or block it. She simply sent a wave of pure, unconditional calm toward that distant light. She imagined a quiet forest, a gentle stream, the feeling of soft moss underfoot. She poured all the peace she could muster into that invisible tether. For a long time, nothing happened. Then, the frantic, jagged edges of his pain began to smooth out. The turbulent sea of his emotions grew still. The connection between them hummed with a quiet, shared relief. In his distant tower, King Caelthorn looked up from the ancient texts he'd been studying, his head snapping up as if from a dream. The chronic, splitting headache that was his constant companion had vanished. The snarling of the beast in his soul had fallen silent. He went to his own window, staring across the courtyard toward her chambers, toward the source of this impossible peace. For the first time in his adult life, his mind was utterly, blessedly quiet. and he knew, with a certainty that terrified him, that it was her doing. The next evening, he came. Serenith was sitting by the fire, a book untouched in her lap, when the doors to her chamber opened without a knock. King Calethorn stood there, not in his intimidating armor, but in a simple black tunic and trousers. The absence of his armor made him seem both more human and more dangerous. He said nothing, simply walking to the hearth and staring down into the flames. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken thoughts. Serenith's heart beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "How did you do it?" he finally asked, his voice a low growl. He did not look at her. "Do what, Your Majesty?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Last night," he said, turning to face her. His gray eyes were burning with an intensity that made her breath catch. The pain, it stopped. The rage, it was gone. That was you. Serenith clutched the book to her chest like a shield. I have a sort of empathy. I can feel what others feel. Sometimes I can project. Calmness. He took a step closer, his shadow falling over her. Project, he repeated, testing the word. You sent me peace from across the castle. He sounded incredulous, accusatory almost. I only wanted to help, she said, shrinking back in her chair. His expression hardened. No one helps me. They fear me. They obey me. They plot against me. But they do not help me. He took another step, looming over her now. What are you? The question was raw, torn from a place of deep confusion and suspicion. He was a man who understood power in the form of claws and teeth and armies. Her soft, intangible gift was a mystery he couldn't solve, and it infuriated him. I am an Omega, she answered softly. My wolf is weak. This is all I have. He stared at her for a long moment, his gaze tracing her features as if trying to find the source of her strange magic. Then he did something that shocked her more than any display of power could have. He knelt. The Alpha King, the ruler of all the packs, knelt before her chair, bringing his eyes level with hers. The act was so contrary to his nature, so profoundly humbling, that it stole the air from her lungs. Show me, he commanded, his voice rough with a desperate vulnerability. Do it again. Serenith hesitated. He was too close, his presence too overwhelming. She could feel the beast stirring just beneath his skin, a low, guttural vibration of suspicion and need. It was drawn to her, but it did not trust her. Slowly, she lifted a trembling hand. She didn't dare touch him. Instead, she let it hover in the air, inches from his face. She closed her eyes and reached for that quiet place inside herself. She didn't project it this time. She let it emanate from her, a gentle aura of solace. She thought of sunlight on a closed eyelid, the scent of rain on dry earth, the feeling of a sleeping animal's steady breath. A shudder ran through Calethorn. A low groan escaped his lips, a sound of such profound relief it was almost painful to hear. The rigid lines of his face softened. The storm in his eyes calmed to a gentle sea. He leaned into her aura, his eyes closing, like a man dying of thirst finding a spring. More, he rasped, the word a broken plea. Emboldened, Serenith moved her hand and gently, tentatively, placed her palm against his cheek. His skin was hot, feverish. At her touch, the last vestiges of his inner turmoil washed away. The beast within him did not just sleep, it purred. It was a sound of deep, primal contentment, a rumbling vibration that traveled from his chest, through her hand, and into the very core of her being. The mate pull, which had been a sharp jolt at the ball, was now a deep, resonant hum between them. It was a song that her soul had been waiting to hear its entire life. He opened his eyes, and the ice was gone. In its place was a raw, unguarded awe. He looked at her not as a tool or a curiosity, but as a miracle. "Serenith," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion. He covered her hand with his own, pressing it tighter against his face. The moment was shattered by a sharp, commanding knock on the door. "Your Majesty, Lord Velmeyer demands an audience. He brings the council." It was Fenrith's voice, tight with urgency. Calethorn stiffened, the kingly mask slamming back into place. He rose to his feet in one fluid motion, the brief moment of peace utterly destroyed. The storm was gathering again, not inside him, but at his door. He looked from the door back to Serenith, his expression a complex mixture of fury and regret. "This is not over," he promised, his voice low and dangerous, before striding to the door and pulling it open to face the coming conflict. Lord Velmeyer swept into the room, flanked by two other grim-faced members of the High Council. His eyes, cold and sharp as chips of flint, immediately found Serenith by the fire and narrowed in distaste. "Calethorn, this farce has gone on long enough," Velmeyer began, dispensing with any formal address. "The packs are unsettled. They whisper that their king has been bewitched by a wolfless waif, that you have lost your mind." Calethorn stood tall, his sheer presence diminishing the other men in the room. "The packs whisper what you feed them, uncle. Your ambition is as subtle as a forest fire. My ambition is for the stability of this kingdom," Velmeyer retorted, his voice rising. "A stability you jeopardize by sequestering this creature. She has no lineage, no power, no worth. By all rights, she should have been cast out of her own pack years ago." Each word was a poisoned dart aimed at Serenith. She shrank into her chair, the familiar shame washing over her. He was right. By their laws, by their culture, she was worthless. "Her worth," Calethorn said, his voice dropping to a lethal calm, "is something you are incapable of understanding. She stays. That is my final word." "It cannot be." One of the other councilmen, a grizzled old alpha named Lord Thorin, spoke up. "Your Majesty, the traditions have given me a crown of thorns and a lifetime of agony." Calethorn snarled, taking a menacing step forward. The beast was close to the surface now, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "This is the first respite I have ever known, and you would rip it from me for the sake of your precious hollow traditions? I am the king. My word is law. She is under my protection. Anyone who dares to harm her or question her place here will answer to me. Directly." He let the threat hang in the air, his gaze daring any of them to challenge him. The councilmen shifted uncomfortably. They were powerful alphas, but they were not foolish enough to challenge a furious King Calethorn in close quarters. Velmeyer, however, was made of sterner, more venomous stuff. A cruel smile touched his lips. "Protection? You cannot even protect yourself, nephew. We all know what you are. We all know what lurks beneath your skin. How long until your pet's calming influence fails? How long until the beast you harbor decides it wants a new toy to break?" The insult was calculated, designed to provoke. Serenith felt a surge of pure, murderous rage from Calethorn, so potent it made her gasp. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen and writhe. The king's form flickered just for a second, as if a darker, larger shape were trying to tear its way out. "Get out!" Calethorn hissed, his voice distorted, layered with a guttural echo that was not entirely human. Velmeyer's smile widened. He had gotten the reaction he wanted. He had shown the council a glimpse of the king's instability. "As you wish, Your Majesty." He gave a mocking bow and turned to leave, his fellow council members shuffling quickly after him. As the door closed, Calethorn stumbled back, one hand pressed to his temple. A deep groan of pain was torn from his throat. The backlash of his fury was turning inward, feeding the curse. "Calethorn!" Serenith cried, forgetting all formality. She rushed to his side as he staggered toward a chair. "Stay back," he gasped, his body trembling violently. I'm losing control." His eyes were no longer gray. They were swirling vortexes of pure blackness. The veins on his neck and hands stood out, dark and pulsing with shadow. He was fighting a losing battle. But Serenith did not stay back. She remembered the peace she had given him, the way he had knelt before her. She would not let Velmir win. She would not let this pain consume him. She reached him just as his knees buckled, catching him, her slight frame struggling under his weight. "Look at me," she commanded, her voice imbued with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Breathe with me, Calethorn. I am here. I am not afraid." He looked at her, his face a mask of agony, the man warring with the monster in his eyes. He was losing. The shadow was winning. The transformation was not like a normal shift. It was a violent, horrifying unraveling. Shadowy tendrils erupted from Calethorn's back, coalescing into a larger, more monstrous form. His body contorted, bones cracking and reforming with sickening sounds. A roar of pure, unadulterated agony and rage tore through the room, a sound that shook the very stones of the castle. Where the king had stood, there was now a creature of nightmare. It was bipedal but hunched, larger than a bear, and seemed woven from living shadow. Its fur was the color of pitch, its claws were like obsidian daggers, and its eyes glowed with a malevolent crimson light. This was the Shadow Wolf, the truth of the royal curse made manifest. Serenith was thrown back by the force of the transformation, landing in a heap near the hearth. Her every instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to cower. This was not a wolf. This was a demon. The beast turned its glowing red eyes on her. It let out another guttural snarl, a sound of pure predatory intent. It took a step toward her, its claws scraping grooves into the stone floor. Fear, cold and absolute, threatened to paralyze her. But then, through the terror, her empathy pierced the veil of the monster's rage. Beneath the fury, beneath the killing intent, she felt him. Calethorn. He was still in there, a tiny, flickering candle of consciousness being consumed by a hurricane of darkness. He was trapped, terrified, and in unimaginable pain. The beast was not just a monster, it was his suffering given form. That realization changed everything. Her fear did not vanish, but it was overshadowed by a wave of fierce, protective compassion. She would not abandon him to this darkness. As the beast lunged, not to kill but to corner her, she did not scream. She got to her feet, her hands held out in a placating gesture. "Calethorn," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "I know you are in there. I am not your enemy." The creature paused, its head cocked as if confused by the sound of her voice. It let out a low, warning growl, the crimson in its eyes pulsing. It could not understand her words, but it could feel the absence of fear in her. Serenith took a deep breath and did the most foolish, most courageous thing she had ever done in her life. She reached out with her gift. She didn't just project calm, she opened herself up completely, dropping all her mental and emotional shields. She exposed the soft, vulnerable core of her spirit to the raging monster. "I see your pain," she sent, not in words, but in pure feeling. "You are not alone in it. Let me share the burden." The beast roared and recoiled as if struck. Her empathy was a foreign concept to its world of rage and instinct. It was like dousing a fire with water. It hissed, shaking its massive head, the shadows around it flickering violently. She took a tentative step closer. "It's all right," she whispered, pouring more and more of her essence into the connection between them. She didn't try to fight the darkness. She simply filled the space with light, a gentle, pervasive glow of acceptance and peace. The crimson in the creature's eyes began to fade, replaced by flickers of stormy gray. The guttural growling softened into a sound of confusion and pain. It looked down at its own shadowy claws as if seeing them for the first time. Serenith took another step, and another, until she was standing directly before the towering monster. It trembled, its massive form starting to destabilize. She reached up a trembling hand and laid it on the creature's chest, right over its heart. The moment her skin made contact with the living shadow, a wave of pure solace flooded the beast. It cried out, a sound that was no longer a roar but a mournful keen. The shadowy form began to collapse inward, dissolving like smoke in the wind. The monstrous shape shrank, the darkness receding back into the man at its center. Calethorn collapsed to his knees, no longer a monster, but a man, naked and shivering, his body covered in a sheen of cold sweat. He was gasping for air, his eyes wide with disbelief and exhaustion. He stared at Serenith, who stood before him, her hand still resting on his chest. She had not run. She had faced the very worst part of him, the secret that had isolated him his entire life, and she had not even flinched. She had saved him from himself. "Serenith," he choked out, his voice raw. He reached up and grabbed her hand, holding it to his heart as if it were his only salvation. The last of the shadows in his eyes receded, leaving only the clear storm gray of the man, filled with a look of utter soul-shattering reverence. In the aftermath of the transformation, a profound quiet filled the room. The only sound was Calethorn's ragged breathing as he knelt on the cold stone floor, clinging to Serenith's hand. The king, who was feared by all, was reduced to a state of raw, trembling vulnerability, and Serenith felt no triumph, only a deep, aching tenderness. She gently pulled a heavy fur rug from a nearby chair and draped it over his shoulders. He didn't seem to notice, his gaze fixed on her face, searching it for any sign of fear or revulsion. He found none. "You saw," he finally managed to say, his voice hoarse. "You saw the beast." "I saw you," she corrected softly, trapped, hurting. His grip on her hand tightened. "Others have seen it. Guards. A healer once. They ran screaming. One lost his mind entirely. But you walked toward it." He shook his head in disbelief. "Why?" "Because I wasn't afraid of it," she said, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "I was afraid for you." The simple, honest truth of her words seemed to break something within him. The last of his iron control crumbled, and a single tear traced a path down his cheek. It was a startling sight, a crack in the mountain. He quickly turned his head, hiding the evidence of his weakness, but Serenith had seen it. "It has been a part of me since I was a boy," he confessed, his voice low and rough. "The first time it happened, I was 10. I destroyed my father's study. The curse grows stronger with every generation. My father could control his shifts. My grandfather barely felt it. For me, it is a constant war. To rule, I must be in control. But every day it takes more of my strength just to keep it caged." He finally looked back at her, his eyes filled with a lifetime of loneliness. "That is why I live in this fortress. Why I keep everyone at a distance. I am a danger to everyone around me. I am a danger to you." "You didn't hurt me," she pointed out gently. "Even then, you could have, but you didn't." "Because of you," he said, his voice rising with frustrated awe. You're Whatever it is you do, it reached it. It calmed it. Nothing has ever done that before. Magic, potions, ancient rituals, they only make it angrier. But you, he trailed off, unable to articulate the miracle she represented. Serenith knelt in front of him, taking his other hand. You don't have to fight it alone anymore, Calethorn. Using his first name felt natural, right. The king was gone, at least for this moment. There was only the man, the mate her soul recognized. The bond between them was no longer just a pull. It was a deep, resonant chord, humming with shared pain and newfound hope. He stared at their joined hands, then back up at her face. He saw no pity in her eyes, only strength and acceptance. She saw the monster that lived inside him and called it by his name. Slowly, he leaned forward, his movements hesitant, as if he expected her to pull away. He rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the cool air. The contact was electric, a current of pure emotion passing between them. He felt her calm, her compassion, her unwavering steadiness. She felt his immense relief, his gratitude, and the fragile beginnings of a feeling he had never allowed himself to experience: love. My uncle was right about one thing, Calethorn murmured, his eyes closed. I have been bewitched. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, but not by a creature. By a miracle. He began to lean in, his intention clear. His lips were inches from hers, promising a kiss that would seal their impossible bond. But the moment was broken again, this time by Fenrith bursting into the room, his face ashen. Calethorn! Forgive me, but you must come. Velmeyer has invoked the challenge of blood. He has formally accused you of being unfit to rule due to the curse, and has challenged you for the throne. The council has accepted. It is to be a trial by combat, at dawn. The news hit the quiet room like a physical blow. A challenge of blood was the most ancient and brutal of their traditions, a fight to the death for the crown. It hadn't been invoked in over 3 centuries. Calethorn surged to his feet, the fur rug falling away. The vulnerability of moments before was gone, replaced by a cold, deadly fury. The king was back. He dares! Calethorn snarled, his voice a low growl that vibrated with power. After all his scheming, he finally shows his true colors. He will not win the throne by politics, so he will try to take it with blood. He knows you are weakened, Fenrith said, his voice grim. He provoked you tonight for a reason. He wanted to force a transformation, to drain your strength before the challenge. The council believes he acts for the good of the kingdom, to remove a tainted king. Calethorn's fists clenched. He has made a fatal miscalculation. No, Serenith said, her voice cutting through their grim planning. Both men turned to look at her. Fenrith is right. He is trying to force you to fight, to draw on the beast. It's a trap, Calethorn. If you give in to your rage in the arena, you will prove him right. You will become the monster he claims you are in front of the entire court. Calethorn's jaw tightened. He knew she was right. His greatest weapon, the unholy power of his curse, was also his greatest liability. To use it would be to lose everything, even if he won the fight. But to fight an alpha as strong as Velmeyer without it? He leaves me no choice, Calethorn said, his voice flat. There is always a choice, Serenith insisted, stepping toward him. She placed a hand on his arm, and he could feel the gentle, calming energy flowing from her. Fight him as a man, as a king, not as a monster. Let me help you. He looked down at her, at the fierce determination in her soft eyes. She was offering him not just solace, but strategy. She was offering him a new way to be strong. How? He asked, his voice softer. Stay with me until dawn, she said. Don't let yourself be consumed by anger. Let me keep the beast quiet. Go into that arena with a clear mind and a calm heart. Your strength as a warrior is legendary, even without the curse. Trust that. Trust yourself. Fenrith looked between them, a flicker of hope in his weary eyes. She is right, my king. Your skill with a blade is unmatched. Velmeyer is strong, but he is arrogant. A clear head is an advantage he will not anticipate. Calethorn stood conflicted for a long moment. Every instinct screamed at him to embrace the rage, to unleash the overwhelming power that would tear his uncle apart. It was the only way he had ever known how to solve his most dire problems. But looking into Serenith's eyes, he saw a different path, a harder path, but one that led not just to survival, but to true victory. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. Very well. He turned to Fenrith. Make the preparations. I will meet my uncle in the arena at dawn. Fenrith bowed and left, leaving them alone once more. Calethorn turned back to Serenith, his expression unreadable. He reached out and cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin. You are asking me to face my death with nothing but my own strength, something I have not trusted in years. You are not alone, she whispered, leaning into his touch. I will be with you. Every moment, for the few hours that remained until dawn, she did not leave his side. She did not speak of the fight. Instead, she sat with him before the fire, her hand in his, and she told him stories. Simple tales from her childhood, stories of the sun and the moon, of brave rabbits and clever foxes. She poured all of her calm, all of her light, into him. She held the snarling beast at bay with nothing but the soft power of her voice and the steady strength of her spirit. As the first gray light of dawn crept through the window, Calethorn rose. He was calm, his eyes clear and focused. The frantic, pained energy that usually clung to him was gone. He was simply a king, preparing for battle. He donned his armor piece by piece, the metal gleaming in the firelight. When he was done, he looked every inch the ruler he was born to be. He walked to the door, then paused, turning back to her. If I do not return, you will return, she said with unshakable certainty. He gave her a small, rare smile. It transformed his harsh features, giving her a glimpse of the man he could be without the curse. Wait for me. Then he was gone, his. Footsteps echoing down the stone corridor, walking toward a fight that would decide not only his life, but the future of the entire kingdom. Serenith sank into a chair, her body trembling now that he was gone, and sent every ounce of her strength after him. The arena was a circle of packed earth surrounded by rising stone tiers, open to the cold morning sky. It was a place for settling disputes, for displays of strength, and now for a king's potential execution. The court was assembled, their faces grim and expectant. Lord Velmeyer stood in the center, bare-chested, armed with a wicked-looking gladius. He was a formidable figure, his body a roadmap of scars from past battles, his alpha power radiating from him in waves of arrogant confidence. When Calethorn entered, a murmur went through the crowd. They had expected the Shadow King, a figure of barely contained rage. Instead, they saw their king, composed and controlled, his eyes as clear and cold as the dawn. He carried a simple longsword, its pommel bearing the royal crest. He looked less like a monster and more like the embodiment of justice. He took his position opposite his uncle, the required 10 paces between them. So, the beast deigns to show some restraint, Velmeyer taunted, his voice echoing in the silent arena. Or has your little Omega pet drained you of your power completely? Calethorn did not rise to the bait. His expression remained impassive. He remembered Serenith's words. A clear head is an advantage he will not anticipate. This ends today, Velmire, Calethorn said, his voice calm and carrying. Your treason, your ambition, your corruption. It all ends with your blood on this sand. Fenrith, acting as the arbiter, raised his hand. The challenge of blood is joined, let it be to the death. He dropped his hand, and Velmire charged. The fight was brutal from the first moment. Velmire was a whirlwind of aggressive force, his gladius a blur of silver, seeking to overwhelm Calethorn with sheer ferocity. Calethorn, however, was a rock. He met the onslaught with patient, precise defense, his longsword a wall of steel. He parried, blocked, and sidestepped, his movements economical and fluid. He was fighting with pure, honed skill, not the wild rage his uncle had expected. Velmir's frustration grew with every deflected blow. "Fight me, you coward!" he roared, swinging his sword in a wide, reckless arc. "Unleash the monster! Show them all what you are!" Calethorn saw his opening. He ducked under the wild swing, his own sword flashing out in a precise thrust that scored a deep gash along Velmire's ribs. Velmire roared in pain and fury, stumbling back. First blood went to the king. From her balcony high above, Serenith watched, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. She could feel the battle through her bond with Calethorn. She felt his focus, his control. She felt the beast, chained and snarling deep within him, desperate to be unleashed, and she sent a continuous wave of calm, a silent mantra of peace, control, strength. The fight wore on. Calethorn, with his superior reach and flawless technique, began to dominate. He landed another cut on Velmire's arm, then another on his leg. His uncle was slowing, his movements growing sloppy with rage and pain. The court watched in stunned silence as their supposedly unstable king systematically dismantled one of the most feared warriors in the kingdom without once tapping into his cursed power. Seeing the fight turning against him, Velmire grew desperate. During a brief clash of swords, he sneered, his voice low and venomous. "Even if you kill me, you lose. I have a contingency. A little parting gift for your Omega." Calethorn's control wavered for a fraction of a second. "What did you do?" "There is a slow-acting poison in the wine that was sent to her chambers this morning. Odorless, tasteless, derived from silverwood ash. It won't kill a normal shifter, just make them ill. But for someone with a weak or non-existent wolf like hers, it will simply unravel her from the inside out. She'll be dead by noon." Velmire grinned, his teeth stained red with blood from a split lip. "You can have your throne. You will just have to rule. Alone again. Forever." A tidal wave of pure black rage crashed over Calethorn. Serenith. He had poisoned Serenith. From her balcony, Serenith felt the shift. The calm she had been projecting was consumed by an inferno. Calethorn's control shattered. A guttural, inhuman roar echoed across the arena, and the shadows around him began to writhe. The beast was coming. This was Velmire's trap. The sky above the arena seemed to darken as Calethorn's power exploded. The controlled king vanished, replaced by a vessel of pure wrath. His eyes bled to black, and the air crackled with dark energy. Velmire laughed, a triumphant, ugly sound. "There it is!" he bellowed to the horrified court. "Behold your true king! A monster who cannot control his own rage." Calethorn barely heard him. The only thought in his mind was Serenith, dying. The beast inside him screamed for release, promising the power to end Velmire in a single, brutal second, and then race back to her side. It was a temptation beyond endurance. He could feel his body beginning to contort, the transformation starting to take hold. But then, A new sensation cut through the rage. It was a voice, clear and steady, not in his ears, but in his very soul. Calethorn. He is lying. It was Serenith. The bond between them, forged in pain and strengthened by their connection, had become a conduit. She was speaking to him, mind to mind. He is trying to make you lose control, her mental voice continued, a beacon of calm in his inner storm. I am fine. I felt the poison in the wine the moment the servant brought it. A faint trace of malice. I never touched it. Fight him, Calethorn. Finish this. As you. Her words were a lifeline. The truth of them resonated through the bond, and he knew, with absolute certainty, that she was safe. Velmir had lied. The trap was not the poison, the trap was the rage itself. With a monumental act of will, Calethorn reined in the beast. The shadows receded. The blackness in his eyes faded back to stormy gray. He stood straight, the monstrous power settling back into a coiled, controlled stillness within him. He looked at his uncle, and the expression on his face was more terrifying than any monstrous form. It was the cold, absolute certainty of a king delivering judgment. Velmir's triumphant laughter died in his throat. His plan had failed. Calethorn had controlled the beast, even at the peak of his rage. He had mastered the curse. Liar, Calethorn said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of a death sentence. He moved. It wasn't a charge. It was a fluid, inescapable advance. He was no longer just defending. His sword became an extension of his will, a blur of silver and death. Velmir, shocked and suddenly afraid, could only give ground, his defense clumsy and desperate. Clang. Calethorn's sword knocked the gladius from his uncle's hand. It spun through the air and landed in the dust. Clang. A disarming strike sent Velmir's backup dagger flying. Velmir stood disarmed and bleeding before his king. The arrogant confidence was gone, replaced by raw, primal fear. Calethorn did not hesitate. He did not gloat. He simply stepped forward and ran his sword through his uncle's heart. It was a clean, swift, and merciless end. Velmir stared at him, his eyes wide with shock, a trickle of blood appearing at the corner of his mouth. The curse, he rasped. It will still destroy you. No, Calethorn said, his voice cold. It will not. He pulled his sword free, and Lord Velmir, the traitor who had plagued his reign and his family for decades, collapsed into the dust, his lifeblood staining the earth of the arena. A stunned silence fell over the court. Calethorn stood over his uncle's body, his chest heaving, not with exhaustion, but with the aftermath of the immense control he had exerted. He had won. He had faced his greatest trial and won, not as a beast, but as a man, as a king. His gaze lifted, sweeping over the shocked faces of his council, his people, and then upward, finding her. He looked at Serenith, standing on her balcony, and in front of the entire kingdom, he lowered his head in a gesture of silent, profound gratitude. She had not just saved his life, she had saved his soul. With the death of Velmir, the immediate threat was gone, but the tension in the kingdom remained. Calethorn had proven his control, but he had also confirmed the existence of his curse to the entire court. He was a victor, but a vulnerable one. He did not return to Serenith's chambers immediately. There was a kingdom to secure. He spent the hours after the duel in the throne room, his bloody sword still at his side, his armor still stained with dust and gore. He met with the council, his gaze hard and unforgiving. There was no more room for debate. There was no more questioning his authority. He had demonstrated a level of control and power none of them had thought possible. He had defeated a master warrior while holding a demon at bay. They saw not a cursed man, but a king of unimaginable strength. One by one, the lords who had sided with Velmir knelt and swore new oaths of fealty, their faces pale with fear and newfound respect. By the time the sun set, his rule was absolute, stronger and more secure than ever before. Fenrith had overseen the removal of Velmir's body and the quiet arrest of his few remaining co-conspirators. The coup was over. Only then did Caelthorn allow himself to return to her. He found Serenith by the fire, just as he had left her. She rose as he entered, her eyes searching his face. He was exhausted, the lines of strain deep around his eyes, but he was whole. He was free. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. He held her not with the desperate grip of a drowning man, but with the steady, reverent embrace of a worshipper at a shrine. "It's over," he murmured against her hair. "He's gone." "I know," she whispered, her arms wrapping around his armored waist. "I felt it." He pulled back, his hands framing her face. "You saved me, Serenith." In the arena, he would have broken me. "You saved yourself," she insisted. "You chose control. You chose to be a king." "I chose you," he corrected, his voice thick with an emotion he no longer tried to hide. "When I thought he had hurt you, the beast was all I had. But your voice, it was stronger." The raw honesty between them was a powerful, intoxicating thing. All the masks were gone, all the walls torn down. There was only a man and a woman, bound by a fate that was both a curse and a miracle. "The curse is not gone, Caelthorn," she said softly, her brow furrowed with concern. "You have mastered it, but the pain, the darkness, it is still there." She could feel it, a dormant volcano deep within him. He nodded, his expression grim. "It is a part of my blood. It cannot be undone. But with you, it can be managed. It can be ruled, just as I rule this kingdom." He looked at her, his storm-gray eyes softening. "Serenith of Silver Mist, my wolfless Omega, my savior. You have shown me a strength I never knew existed. Not the strength of claws and fury, but of heart and spirit." He lowered his head, and this time there were no interruptions, no challenges, no counsels, no threats. This time there was only them. His lips met hers, and the world fell away. The kiss was not one of passion or desperate need, but of profound gratitude and deep, soul-shaking love. It was a promise, a vow. It was the sealing of their bond, the final, irrefutable acknowledgement of the mate pull that had drawn them together from the very beginning. In that kiss, Serenith felt the last of her own insecurities, the shame of being a broken Omega, melt away. Her weakness was her strength, her empathy was her power. Here, in the arms of the Shadow King, she was not just accepted, she was revered. She was not a prisoner, she was the keeper of the king's heart. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Caelthorn rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me, Serenith," he said, his voice a low, earnest plea. "Be my queen, rule by my side, help me heal this kingdom, help me heal myself." Tears of joy welled in Serenith's eyes. The shy Omega who no one would dance with, the girl who had been an outcast her entire life, was being asked to be a queen. "Yes," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Yes, Caelthorn. Always, yes." The following day, Caelthorn called a full assembly of the court. He stood on the dais before the throne, not in armor, but in the formal robes of his office. Serenith stood beside him, her hand held firmly in his. She wore a simple gown of deep blue that matched the calm in her eyes, a stark contrast to the glittering, ostentatious finery of the other court ladies. A nervous energy filled the throne room. They had witnessed the king kill his uncle and secure his throne. Now, they waited to see what this new era would bring. Yesterday, Calethorn began, his voice ringing with authority. This kingdom was threatened by treason born of fear and prejudice. Lord Velmeyer believed that strength was only measured in physical power and the ferocity of one's wolf. He believed this kingdom needed a queen who fit that narrow, brutal definition. His gaze swept over the assembled lords and ladies. He was wrong. True strength is not the power to destroy, but the power to heal. It is not found in rage, but in compassion. It is not the dominion of alphas alone. He turned his gaze to Serenith, his expression softening for all to see. This woman, Serenith of the Silver Mist Pack, an Omega you have all dismissed as weak and broken, possesses a strength greater than any warrior in this room. She faced my curse without fear. She gave me the clarity to defeat my enemies. She saved my life, and she has saved my reign. A murmur of disbelief and wonder went through the crowd. Calethorn raised her hand, his voice booming with a king's command. She is my chosen mate, my queen. You will show her the same respect and loyalty you show me. Her word is my word. Her power is the power that will now guide this kingdom. He then turned to her, and in front of the entire court, he knelt. The king, who had knelt for her once in the privacy of her chambers, now knelt before her in the presence of all his subjects. It was an act of profound devotion, a public shattering of the old hierarchy. "My queen," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Serenith's heart swelled. She looked out at the sea of faces, her shocked parents, her stunned sister, the powerful alphas who had once looked through her as if she were glass, and she felt no fear. She placed her hand on Calethorn's head, a gesture of acceptance and partnership.